with the fear that someone's gonna, like the magician's gonna try to involve me, like, I'm not here to do the intro, so suddenly it's terrifying where, like, if I was on a show where my job was to do the intro, I wouldn't care, but now I'm like, "Don't call on me.
Yeah.
I'm here to watch."
Zach writes out a script every week, and I always feel like that's a lot more than needs to be done. It could just be,
I certainly need to
"Hey, guys."
remember I guess I have this open.
Oh, speaking of remember, I started to say earlier, I didn't get to it. Like, because of the Berkshires trip, and also just because Erica's a badass, we
Yeah.
are so we have done recorded music in ready
Ooh.
to roll every episode up through the 20th of October right now. I've
Ooh, well
never
done.
ever in 10 years of doing this show been in that position. Like we got like
Yeah.
we knocked part of it was I had
Don't I know
conferences
it.
last week, so I was like I had to be at school for 4 hours and like hardly anybody comes to conferences.
Yeah.
And Erica had the outlines done, so I was like I'm going to take this time and I'm going to catch up to her. And
Hell yeah.
she's getting so good at writing those outlines that I'm able like the script writing process is so much what used to take me 16 hours takes me 2 or 3 hours now
God, that's
to
so
write
great.
scripts. Mhm.
Oh, I remembered one more thing. Oh, good. Yeah, are we in the big chat?
Yes.
Are who is it who does the wine stuff in Santa Barbara County? Is it Phil? Is it Phil? Alan? Am I coming up with I've named my
It's
dad and I've named my uncle. No,
Phil
I've named my
Carpenter.
dad and I've named my dad's middle name. That's what I've just done. And also my uncle.
Yeah, I think it was Phil Carpenter, wasn't it?
Is it Phil Carpenter? See, I'm not crazy. Phil, if you're in here, maybe I can talk to you about we need some wine sponsors for SF Sketchfest in San Francisco.
How about Naked Wines? They're a sponsor of Truth and Justice podcast.
Why don't you put us in touch?
I don't know them.
Okay.
I could, yeah,
Thanks for nothing.
yeah. Well, I mean, it comes to me through my ad agent, so I don't really
Yeah.
ever talk to them. Nick said that Erica's going for Employee of the Month. I tell her that all the time.
Yeah.
Every time she sends me.
This month she might really win.
Oh, do you know what I did today, which I thought was a really good thing to do as both a boss and a friend. So about a month ago, Erica sent me this thing from Instagram where on October 8th, Wendy's was doing a collab with SpongeBob SquarePants, and they were
Today's
making
that day. Uh-huh.
Krabby Patties and like pineapple Frosties. And she sent me
Cute.
this thing, and she's like, "We need to get this." And so like I literally like jokingly wrote on the calendar Wendy's picnic on October 8th.
Mhm.
But it was still summer then. I wasn't back at school, so I literally thought we'll probably just order Wendy's on that day,
Right.
forgetting that I was at school.
Right.
I have barely seen her in the last week because I had conferences Wednesday and Thursday last week. Saw her for
Yeah.
a few minutes Friday.
Talking.
Yesterday, I had to go drop my truck off, so I didn't see her. Today, I had a staff meeting, so I was going to see her. So like normally we have like an hour to debrief and like figure out what's next, and we meet. We haven't been able to do that. So today at 10 o'clock in the morning, I'm sitting at school. I'm in my third hour, and my prep is fourth hour, and my prep runs into lunch. So I have an hour and a half off in the middle of the day, which is usually also time when I catch up on my work besides my actual prep stuff that I have to do for school.
Right.
But I'm way caught up. Like I said, we're 2 episodes ahead, caught up with my school stuff. And I thought, you know what? I looked it up. Wendy's starts serving lunch at 10:30, and I did the math. I'm like, I would have time if I pre-order it to go to Wendy's and get the food
Oh.
and bring it here.
Oh.
And Erica was so I
Oh.
didn't tell her because I knew she was going to come in because she always crosses the day off the calendar, and it was written on
Yeah.
there. I knew she was going to come in and see that it said Wendy's picnic, and not only were we not having a Wendy's picnic, but I wasn't going to see her today because I had to go pick up my truck and I had staff meeting.
Aw.
So at 11 o'clock, I come walk in the door. First, she freaked out because she thought she was being serial murdered.
Uh-huh.
And she realized it was just me. And she's like, "What are you doing here? Why aren't you at school?" And I said, because the calendar said it's Wendy's picnic. And she was so happy. It made my day to see how
That's
happy
so
she was.
nice.
And so we sat down and we had our Wendy's picnic together for 20 minutes. And then I turned around and went back to school.
That is so adorable. When do I get to meet that Bob?
I'm nice sometimes.
I know. That's so charming and wonderful. I absolutely love that.
I thought it was fun. It really
Very
made my
sweet.
day because Erica
Yeah.
is the absolute best, and she's doing great
Yeah.
work, and she's my
doing
buddy too.
great work.
Even though
Yeah.
I'm 45 and she's 18, but she's still my
Yeah.
buddy.
She's your buddy. Absolutely.
So that was fun.
That's wonderful.
We had our little Krabby Patty picnic.
How
And
were
then,
how were the Krabby Patties?
It was a Wendy. It was basically a Wendy's burger.
Okay.
It had crabby sauce on it.
I
I don't.
see. Okay.
I've never seen an episode of SpongeBob in my life, so I don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
Um, but best I could tell, the crabby sauce was fancy sauce with perhaps a little bit of garlic and I got a little hint of cayenne, and there was a little bit of a bite
Okay.
to it.
Alright. Wait,
Um,
why was it October 8th? Do you know? Is there,
no
like,
idea.
significance to October 8th?
I have
I
no
know
idea.
this year is, like, the 30th anniversary of SpongeBob or something.
Yeah, I don't know.
Um, Maybe it
Amy want to
premiered
know.
on today. I don't know.
Could be. Amy wants to know how Quentin and Bella are doing at school. Really good. They're doing really well. Quentin is moving in a shaking. He's getting ready. So I think he's finishing he's in a sophomore year, but he also had a ton of credits in high school. So he's really almost a junior. In his program, there's like internships and stuff. So he's like in the game dev clubs, and he did some big competition, and they
Damn.
won the competition.
Nice.
They did all this stuff. So he's kind of buried with work. Right, his freshman year was super easy, so he always calls me every Sunday just to catch up. And he's just like, "This is crazy. I have to actually keep a calendar and keep track of my shit and know what I'm doing because he's busy."
Yeah.
But he's having a ball, and he's, of course, he's Quentin, so
He's so smart.
he has all of his little side projects and things that he's doing on top of that.
Yeah.
He can't sit still. And Bella is doing well. We had this was the first weekend, this past weekend, that we did not see Bella. Since she's been in school, she has either come home or asked us to come see her every weekend.
She's so
She
cute.
she does not like being away from mom and dad. But this I
Aw.
call after I got off the phone with Quentin, I called her Sunday to check in. She's just like, "Yeah." And I'm like, she was like half asleep. It was like 10 o'clock at night. And I was like, "I was just calling to check in. I haven't seen you or heard from you. You doing okay?" And yeah, she said she's doing good. She's doing well in her classes.
Great.
Starting to settle into dorm life. We're going to see her though the weekend. She's actually, her fall break is when we're in the Berkshires, so she was not happy about
Oh,
that.
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
But the following weekend is parents' weekend, so we're going up there to go to the football game with her that weekend.
Great. Great, great, great. It's, the 25th anniversary today of SpongeBob. I apologize. I apologize to my other employer, Nickelodeon. Other
Yeah.
employer, like you pay me?
Right.
That's rich. When's my anniversary? What Krabby Patties am I gonna get on my anniversary?
What all we gotta do is the magic thing is to write it on the calendar, and then I make it
Neat.
happen. I
Neat.
I truthfully, as much of an asshole as I am, you'd be surprised like how often, like, I love to do little like nice
Oh, you're
little fun
very
things for
sweet.
people
You're
that
very sweet.
will shock people.
Yeah.
And the joy on that young girl's face when that young lady's face when she saw her pineapple milkshake or pineapple
Ooh.
frosty
Yeah.
was made it all worth it.
Lovely. Lovely.
Don't let me forget. You have so many notes. Why don't I write myself a note? I want to say something about
Uh,
the forgot what I was going to say. Oh, about the transcripts that Joni caught.
okay.
But I have it on here.
I
just
wish
so I
that
don't.
yeah, I can't add it to housekeeping anymore.
Yes.
It's too
Nope.
late for me.
Don't. You have notes in 17 different places. All right, so we're gonna end this pregame thing. We'll talk to you pre-gamers next week. We love you guys. We'll talk to you later. Bye bye.
Bye, Briggy Boo! Brr, brr, brr. Just want to try that out.
We'll see if Alphonic just takes all that out.
That's a good question.
All right, are we ready to start the big show?
Yeah. Again, am not prepared, but alrighty.
And let me know when you are prepared.
I mean, I'm as prepared as I'm going to be.
And you're recording already. Okay, I
I
see
am.
that you're ready to clap now. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Ahoy, friends. You are listening to the Friday follow-up for Season 15, Episode 15, The Lead Detective, in which Bob breaks down Lead Detective Dan McGinnis's trial testimony and more. We are sans Zach today, which you probably could figure out because it's my voice you're hearing. I'm Janet
Right.
Varney, and I'm joined by Bob Ruff and lots of people in our chat and some listener questions.
Good job. Zach couldn't
Thank
have
you
done it better
so
himself.
much.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Thank you guys for joining us today. We've got a little bit of housekeeping that I can think of. We're kind of scrambling. We're used to Zach handling all our business, and he's on assignment this week. One thing I do want to point out, by the time you hear this may be corrected, depends on how much time I have in the next couple of days. But shout out to listener Joni, who was going through the case documents and was reading through McGinnis's testimony. If you've been on the website to see, there's 3 versions of his testimony. So he testified, he was recalled, and then he was recalled again only for 5 pages during volume 5 of the transcripts. And she noticed that on those 5 pages, the transcripts start at line 4 instead of starting at line 1,
Hmm.
which, I didn't catch because most all but one of those pages, there's nothing really important missing there.
Mhm.
But one of them was like you really wanted to know what was said next. So I went through the original scan and saw they were missing from the original scan. And then I went out in storage and dug out the hard copies because I'm the one that scanned them. I took them to our school and scanned them through our big giant scanner.
Mhm.
And sure enough, it's not just McGinnis's testimony. That entire volume is screwed up.
Oh,
And it's weird because it cut off like an inch of like it didn't scan like an inch of the top of the page,
yeah.
which I don't quite because it's our scanner scans sideways.
Huh.
And it's in their front and back all the pages, so it has to
Yeah.
like bring them through and twist them around, whatever it does inside of that little machine. But somehow, yeah, it like on probably 3/4 of the pages in volume 5, it cut off the top of it. So I need to rescan volume 5 and then re-put that transcript up. So that is coming up. And the thing that's missing in there, we didn't really cover it in today's or this week's episode, was when McGinnis was recalled by the prosecutor at the end of trial. The purpose of that recall was him claiming that he did talk to Princella. So when Princella said that she called, and which I don't, one thing I don't quite get the purpose of it, because if we heard Princella's, wait a minute. I'm, as just mentioned, because we have a trip coming up, I'm 3 episodes ahead right now that we've already recorded,
Okay.
and that's coming up later.
Ah,
Uh,
I guess there is one tiny downside to being this on top of everything.
yeah,
Thank you, Erica.
Yeah, just recorded that episode yesterday,
Okay.
that I'm referencing. But so the other part that I was going to make a point about this episode was one of the things that I said that makes me absolutely crazy about this is that LaShawn says that the police came in, talked to him right away, and he right away told them that day, no, Jody was at work.
Mhm.
They couldn't have been there. Um, as in the recall testimony, where the purpose of it is they're trying to refute something that Princella said, which you'll hear in a couple of weeks at trial. In that, he says, "Oh yeah, I talked to LaShawn. I went to the restaurant and talked to LaShawn Harper and Princella Tobias at the
Hmm.
restaurant." So it was like what I think the part that nobody seemed to, of course, don't. Jody's defense didn't pick anything like this out at trial. Then why isn't it in the police reports?
Sure.
This is exactly like his testimony there proves exactly the thing that is pissing me off so much. He went and talked to Jody's employer right then and there on the stand at trial under oath, says, yes, I went there and I talked to LaShawn and Princella, but never documented. It's not in the report anywhere. You don't hear anything about that in the report. But that was the thing that was, so it was like the page ended that said, it was something along the lines of, so you talked to them. Did you ask them if they had the,
Mm.
and then it cut off the next 3 lines, and the next 3 lines were something about, he didn't say time sheet, but I think he said the schedule.
Mhm.
It said, did they have the schedule? And it basically says, I don't recall if they ever gave it to me,
Hmm.
which is, again, infuriating because the schedule, the timesheet, he did have it, but at trial, he doesn't recall if he ever got it, but it was in the prosecutor's file the whole time.
Which for some of the testimony or the 3 testimonies or however you wanna say it, you do say in this episode, believe it or not, I feel like there's a lot of this seems credible, or at least that he makes a really good witness, and
Yeah.
that the willingness to say, "I don't remember," kind of stuck out as maybe, like, a good and honest thing to you, right?
Yeah, and some of the instances it did, like you have to read it to see when you read through so many transcripts that you kind of get a feel for what the tone was kind of in the room. And
Mhm.
for a lot of the things, like they'll ask him about something, he'll answer it, and they might ask like something that is really detailed that you wouldn't expect somebody to remember. And he says like, I don't remember exactly that. I think I would have, it's like I think I would have talked to Officer McKee, but maybe it was somebody else. I don't. It was things like that. There was a lot of it throughout the testimony. The key, like the big things that I point out in this episode, And this part that we're talking about right now kind of goes right along with that, is when it comes to timing,
Mm.
right? When it comes to timing, that's when like him saying that he got there before McKinney, and as far as, nothing about the time of the crime. And then as far as like Jody's testimony, anything about timing, um, that's where, and part of it is maybe it's because, I know. So like when I read that part, maybe if I had not known that he did in fact have the timesheet the entire time,
Mm.
I might have read that and be like, oh, he just doesn't remember.
Mhm.
Um, but I know that he does, like he had it, sent it to the prosecutor. The prosecutor had it. None of them ever put it in. And then he says, and also there's something about that phrase, I don't recall, to me that always seems disingenuous to me when I read. And if you read through his the other times, he's not saying it. He's just like, I don't remember exactly. He's speaking, like a normal human.
I'm not sure, or yeah, I don't
Yeah, but
remember.
it's always, I don't recall. It's like it always feels like, not that it always is, but it always feels to me like a very intentional, like I'm covering my ass here because I said I don't recall. So you
Mm.
can't say that I'm lying,
Right.
something like that. In this case, like I mean, I'm sure some people will say he really doesn't recall, but like I said, it's in the prosecutor's file. They had it. They didn't put it in as evidence. We don't know if they ever gave it to the defense. And then when it comes up, I don't recall. I don't buy it.
Right. Right. Well, we actually have some feedback from Zach, even though we don't have him with us. He very kindly and thoughtfully sent me over some conversation points. You want to jump into those really quick?
Yeah.
And then we can talk about what the little that I kind of have before we get into our listener questions. So this is from Zach. Maybe I'm forgetting something, but after hearing this episode, I don't understand where Jody's name came from the night of the murder slash early investigation. Leon Newcomb had Leon Newcomb, sorry, had been arrested for the robbery, but to my knowledge, the second suspect hadn't been identified yet. The officer's testimony about identifying Jody at the robbery was well after this, and now we know most likely fabricated. Ms. Lucas's statement about it was JoJo was also months later and now known as untruthful. Where did Jody's name come from? How did they get on the radar so quickly?
So it's a really good question, and I had tracked some of this before, and I believe the first place where we hear Jody's name comes from Andre Williams. So I know for a fact we know that Andre Williams in his like 5 a.m. interview said that he had heard that Jody was responsible.
Hmm.
So because I remember when I read it, I was shocked. I'm like, how are they saying that? Like nothing's happened. How do they know this already? Like, why are they? And obviously, they don't know it. Jody was at work, but how did that name come up so quickly? And then in Sherelle's testimony, which we're going to get into a little while later, Jody's girlfriend Sherelle had stopped by the scene that night, as well as her friend Nadia Butler, and they said that when they stopped at the scene at like 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, right after it happened, they said Andre Williams told Sherelle, "I think your boyfriend shot him."
Hmm.
Like the earliest person that we have record of who immediately was saying that Jody did it was Andre Williams, as far as I know, which is interesting because there's all this weird stuff about Andre to begin with. There's they dropped him off at the crime scene right before Mario went there, and then later it was like, oh no, Mario was just looking for Andre. We have Victoria Miles saying that she thought he was outside talking to Andre right before the murder happened. She said that she assumed it was Dre he was talking to,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have Andre Williams saying that that he was hanging out alone drinking with Mario all night on the other, up by the Miles house, when Candace Smith says they were either driving around with him or they were looking for him the whole time when she was with Mario. So there's all this weird. So there's like this weird stuff all around Andre Williams. And then Andre Williams is immediately pointing the finger at Jody.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Zach also says the testimony about the lighting conditions is extremely telling. The idea that they had to use their headlights to light the scene and that the side of the house was really dark. The only light on the entire scene was the inside entryway light.
Yeah. And that's like, and I'm telling you, there was no light on that other house.
Yeah.
I cannot 110% verify that there was never a light there, but for most of you guys know this, like before and during my time as a fireman, I was a contractor. I've done like I know what to look for if there was, if there used to be a fixture somewhere, especially a
Mhm.
house that's not well taken care of like that one. Like there will be conduit there. There will be an electrical box there. There will be wires there. There will be a pole. There'll be something there. There is nothing on the side of that house. And then, again, we hear McGinnis saying it was completely dark over there. And somehow, like, we're still not calling into question Victoria saying she looked out in that the area that was so dark they had to use their car headlights to see anything. And she's describing the tall, skinny guy with the ponytail running away
Right.
in a situation where the timing doesn't make sense either.
Right. And then finally, Zach says the idea that Jody got combative on the way to take a polygraph for the murder, and that's when McGinnis decides to charge Jody for the robbery, doesn't sit well with me.
Yeah, me neither. And I think the emphasis there is that was the reason they decided to charge him with the robbery.
Right.
What I remember when I very first got the file, reading McGinnis's report about Jody's interview. And I remember reading how Jody or McGinnis was emphasizing that Jody started off like very cordial. He was cooperative, and then it says as they pressured him and basically started accusing him, Jody started to get real mad. And the way McGinnis wrote it was like almost like that made him look guilty, or
Right.
made them look guilty because Jody was like getting mad during that. And I just remember the first thing I was thinking about was back when I first started to learn how to do statement analysis from Jim Clemente.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, and I think it was on one of the episodes of the podcast. I don't remember which case we were talking about, but he was talking about, it might have been the one where we interviewed, might have been Jamie Snow, or it might have been something to do with Jesse Eldridge's interview, somewhere along there. But I
Mm-hmm.
remember him saying, innocent people get real mad when you start
Yeah.
accusing them. Like that's always stuck in my mind. It was like if somebody's guilty, they're really conscious. And this is all obviously typically, right? Not always,
Yeah.
but typically, a guilty person doesn't want to let the tiger out of the cage, so to speak, right? Like they don't want you to see that they're
Okay.
angry, so they'll keep like,
Right.
no, I just don't do it. He says, where an innocent person generally tends to get very angry when you keep accusing them of something they didn't do. And
Right.
I just remember that like popping into my mind when I was reading through that, because it was like the way McGinnis wrote it was like, and then he got really angry. And I remember thinking, well, I remember Jim telling me that that's a sign that they're probably innocent, that they're
Right.
getting mad. And then Jody insisting on the polygraph. And then I need to talk to Jody about like what went on in the car, because I'm so distrusting of McGinnis,
Right.
because like when I first read this report, I've always taken it as fact that, oh, so Jody got pissed off in the car, and so they
Mm-hmm.
didn't take him to do the polygraph. But now after everything else we've learned, I'm like, well,
Was that even true?
but yeah, did
Yeah.
they, or
Yeah.
did McGinnis just not take him, or what are
Right.
they calling combative? I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is weird how it's like, okay, we'll take you to get a polygraph. Oh, they're being combative, so we're going to charge them with robbery. I agree with Zach. That's odd.
Yeah. It's a like A to D where you're like, wait, there's some steps I like not understanding
Right.
that you're making it seem like, well, of course I would do this because this happened, but meanwhile other people are going, wait, why?
Yeah.
Why does that equal that?
I want a quick answer. Tool Girl in the chat wanted to know if Jody and Andre had any issues between them. And did they know each other? As far as I know, they didn't know each other. Like I feel like in one of Andre's reports, they had heard from somebody or heard from somebody that it was. I think the quote was a light skinned guy from out in the Heights or something like that. Like
Hmm.
I don't think they knew each other. No.
Yeah. And just to in Zach talking about what the scene looked like and the clarification on some of that, and again, these kind of changing, shifting stories from person to person about what it looked like, what it didn't look like, whether there was music, whether there wasn't music, whether the trunk, why the trunk would have been propped open, the piece of wood propping the hatchback open. So maybe we've talked about this before, but presumably the hatchback maybe didn't. Something was up with the hinge and like it was sort of
Yeah, I'm
didn't
guessing
stay
that.
up by itself, so you would need to prop it up
Yeah,
with
I'm
a
guessing the shock that there's like a little shock on your hatchback, so we keep them up didn't
yeah.
work, because I'm assuming if that was the case, Mario probably had like a stick there or something, like a
Mhm.
piece of wood in there that he would use to keep it propped open.
Yeah.
But the big thing to me, what I've thought from the very beginning of this, ever since I read Candace Smith's original report, where she said that when Mario dropped her off, he said he had something to do, but he would be back. And then he went to that scene. My immediate thought was, Mario didn't just get jumped there. He wasn't there by happenstance. He went there to do something.
Mhm.
And then we started hearing about that the hatchback is open, and it was again always presented like, and the prosecutor even at one point in some of these testimonies like, oh, because he had these great speakers back there, and that's why the thing was open. But like he may have had great speakers back there, but he clearly wasn't blasting the speakers. Like that's not what was he didn't have the trunk open so that he could blast the music really loud. Dewan James didn't hear it across the street. And then the officers coming in, like Takamoto doesn't recall if there was any, doesn't remember hearing any music. Deanick says he thinks there was. And when I touched on in the episode where I said, I know it would be memorable if it was loud.
Mhm.
And that's because that's from my own personal experience.
Yeah.
That is fucking nerve wracking
Oh god, of
in an
course.
emergency situation, because I can think of one incident specifically, and it wasn't music, but it was a horn, and there's another one I can think of with music, but the horn was the bad one where I pulled up with this bad car
Oh,
accident, it ended up
sure.
being fatal,
Yes.
and I'm trying to, like, check out do all this work, and this goddamn horn was just blowing, and it was like, I
Oh,
don't know,
that's
it was like somebody
maddening.
stabbing me through the
Oh, of
ears,
course. Yeah.
and it wasn't because it was so loud, it was just nerve-wracking, and I remember, like, I grabbed a tool out of my bunker gear and just cut the battery on the car.
Yeah.
I was just like, "I can't take it. I can't stand it." And everybody on the scene was the same way.
Right.
And so, like, if music was, like, blasting out of the car, they would have shut it off immediately. They're not
Right.
gonna leave that blasting going because it's nerve-wracking as hell for the first responders when you're trying to think.
Of course. So
And
even if so what would make sense would be the person who really was there on the scene first, if it's Takimoto, he would be the one that it would make the most sense truthfully. If one person said there was music, it's most likely that it would be like the first officer to the scene would be like, "Well, first thing I'm gonna do, put on some gloves, turn that off." Like,
well,
you
this
know what I
this
mean?
this is what I think happened. When I said I think there probably was music, but it was probably quiet.
Mhm.
So Deanick and Takamoto get to the scene together in the same car.
Mhm.
They were riding together. Takamoto went straight to the body. Deanick went around the side of the house where the car was, looking to make
Mhm.
sure there's nobody else there.
Mhm.
Takamoto doesn't recall there being any music.
Mhm.
Deanick says he thinks there was music.
Okay.
That's why I think there probably was music playing, but it was probably turned way down because
Right.
Deanick was walking over by the car, whereas Takamoto was going straight to the front door. So I think Takamoto couldn't hear the music from where he was at, but Deanick was over by the car and he could hear it from over there, which
I
kind of
gotcha.
tracks too with Dewan
Right.
being across the street and not hearing it over there.
Right.
So that's why I think there probably was. I don't think they're lying about there being music, but I don't think that the purpose of the trunk being open was because they were blasting music. I think there was probably something in the trunk that had to do with that meeting. And again, that's my theory, but that tracks with um, the things we know about Mario. We know that Mario was, from what other witnesses have said, was selling marijuana.
Mhm.
We know that he told, at least from Candace's first story, that he dropped her off because he had something to do, and he's just sitting in this parking lot there.
Mhm.
Like what? Even if it was in her second version, which was she left, or at her trial version, that he dropped her off to go look for Andre.
Right.
In either case, like if he's looking for Andre, why does he just go to the place where they already know Andre isn't
Right.
and just sit there, just stand
Right.
there? It doesn't make sense. It's like I think that he was meeting somebody there. I think there's a possibility that what he's doing was making a deal there.
Mhm.
That somebody came up. But it just, the states, what they push, their narrative that they're pushing is that the trunk was open because he had these great speakers and he was blasting his stereo, and that, in my opinion, clearly was not the case.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I just the only reason I come back to it is that it's just it just feels like a lot of work to do, almost proving your point or proving that, what you suspect may be true is it just seems like a lot of work to do if nothing about the trunk matters. It just seems like, why
Yeah,
are you going to so much trouble? Like, whether there was something in the trunk or not, he could have had music playing softly, he could have had it played loud. It wouldn't necessarily have to matter, except that somehow it's very, very important that the only reason that the trunk was open was that he was like chilling and blasting music. And so it draws a circle around it. Like it draws more attention to it to me. And of course, this is hindsight. Like we have information available showing us all the discrepancies. So that's what makes it draw a circle around it. But it's just to look at that and examine it. It's like God, I wouldn't have cared that much had you not made a huge thing about how loud the music was and that that was the whole point. Now I suspect that maybe that's not true, you know?
Yeah, and
Like
also,
selling
like,
it too hard.
I mean, the whole story there, you have to think about it like this from a and this is in an episode coming in a couple weeks. I really kind of got on to some folks about cognitive, not anybody in particular, but just in general, this kind of cognitive dissonance. How just like I believe Jody's guilty. I have to believe Jody's guilty, so I have to believe this narrative. But you have to think about this logically. So whichever version you believe, if you believe that Mario is out partying with the Mileses and all those people out there, why would he leave and just go hang out in a parking lot by himself at his friend's house? He could have went inside to Victoria's.
Right.
But he's just hanging out outside by himself. Or if again, if you believe Canvas Smith, he's hanging out with her. He seems to be a very social guy. Why would he drop her off because he needs to go stand in a parking lot and listen to music by himself for a while
Right.
and tell her that he's coming back to get her?
Right.
Or if he's going to look for Andre, why does he just go sit in a parking lot by himself and listen? Like that scenario of whatever version of whoever story you want to listen to, of Mario just all of a sudden decides to go stand in a parking lot by himself and quietly listen to music,
Yeah.
doesn't, like, that scenario is nonsense. There's no way. But that scenario has to be it, because it has to be that Jody was looking for him and Jody's talking and Jody just happened to catch him there alone and was planning to go kill him the whole time. It can't be what is, I think, if you really seriously just take a step back, the most logical answer is that he was meeting someone there.
Yeah.
That's not a crazy conspiracy theory. That's not a huge leap. That's what logic tells you was happening there, was that he was
Yeah.
meeting somebody there. And we have witnesses, at least one witness, who says they saw him there with a bunch of people. Like
Right.
there were people there. Like that's just what makes the most sense. The idea of him just going there just to hang out. You have to know that's nonsense.
Right. Right. Okay. I want to get into some of these questions from our wonderful listeners. First of all, keeping it simple, Tool Girl just wondering, you mentioned in the episode up top that there may be other records, other versions of the records out there because of the state police. Any updates on that? Anything you can add to that?
Slight update. Yeah, so I was talking to one of the troopers that worked the case and that I know, and he said, well, if you can get my report, I can read it and I'll have better memory of it. And I told him, I sent the murder book and I'm like, this is all there is. And he's like, that's all, we should have more than that. And I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, the state police task force, or the task force was activated, the homicide task force. State police is part of that. He said procedure was that all agencies connected to the task force all got copies of all the files.
Hmm.
And I said, so, well, are you saying the state police would have the full file and still have it? And he said they absolutely should. So that's when I fired off the FOIA request to the state police. I just got a response yesterday, when the response was, we need 10 more days, which sounds crazy, but that's typical in
Typical.
Michigan. And in Michigan, everywhere, and with my students, they're all doing Michigan cases that they're working on for my investigative journalism class. So they've all had to file. I think we filed like 15 FOIAs in the last few weeks. The students have,
Hmm.
and I told them all, this is what happens in Michigan. Michigan law says they have 5 days to respond. Michigan law also says that they can automatically be given a 10 business day extension if they ask for it,
Hmm.
and that's automatic. I said, so on day 5, you will generally get, we're taking 10 more days.
Yeah.
And it's happened with every single one of their cases, and it's what I got today or yesterday, I think it was. I got the response saying we're taking 10 more days to get the files. But the good news is, what they didn't say is we don't have that file.
Right. And just to be clear, you're not saying that there's something nefarious about that. Many institutions, like bureaucracies, just are always chasing the thing that they have to deal with right in front of them. And it's just like, kick this down the road, kick this down the road. Or do you feel like that's a thing that's like, no, we know we could give it to you today, but we're gonna make sure we don't do that.
No, I don't think that was my point. Is it's not
Yeah.
like we have filed requests from all these different municipalities, and they
Yeah.
all do the
You
exact
just
same
have to
thing.
kick it down the road because you got
Yeah,
your
they
big
just
stack in front of
it
you
takes
and
time.
yeah.
I'm look
Sure.
we're talking about a case from 23 years ago.
Yeah.
I fully expect that we'll get the full and so my hope is that when we get that, number 1, we'll get crime scene photos, which would be huge. Um, and also if there was any recordings, I really suspect and by the way, on that topic, I had name dropped Wendell, one of our great listeners, who does a really good job of like analyzing writing and statements and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Um, about the recording and seemed like he didn't necessarily think that it was that they had the recording, but definitely that they had gone over like exactly what was going to be asked because it's kind of lock and step
Yeah.
with the report, everything. The one that got me is I didn't see in the report anywhere where McGinnis says that he asked multiple times about Jody having a weapon.
Hmm.
So that was the thing, and it could just be that that was what the conversation they had. I don't know. I've always found it odd that they didn't record the interview.
Yeah.
And then I think one of the listeners had pointed out like, what would be the point of if they recorded it of saying that Jody said they got off work at 10 o'clock? And the point that to answer that the point is if what Jody said was I didn't even get off work till midnight and got home at 1 a.m. on the recording, that's a giant problem.
Right.
So you lose the recording, and I'm not saying this happened, but I mean this
Yeah.
would be the utility of it. So then you say you didn't record it, and then you can just write whatever you want, and you can just write that. And think about it, like just think of a world. Again, I'm not saying this is what happened. I am saying McGinnis lied. That's my opinion very strongly. I don't think there's a chance in hell Jody said they got off work at 10. That's ridiculous.
Right.
And you'll hear again in an upcoming episode. You'll just hear just how ridiculous that is. Um, but as far as like not or recording it and getting rid of the recording, but think about by not having that recording, if you just consider for a moment that McGinnis is like lying about all this stuff that Jody said in there, the position it puts a defendant in, you have an officer, a uniformed officer on the stand that says they can make up whatever crazy
Mm.
insanity they want to say
Yeah.
that, yeah, they told me they got off at 10. The position that puts the defendant in, even when they take the stand then later and say, no, that's not what I said. Most 99.9% of jurors are going to believe the officer. They're
Right.
not going to believe the person that was arrested for it who's just claiming the officer lied about something they said. It's like it's a pretty brilliant tactic on the cop's part. If you're trying to be a corrupt cop and you want to just write your own story, don't record anything and just write. I mean, because there's multiple, as we go through these next couple of weeks, there's multiple witnesses that get on the stand and they're questioned, didn't you tell the police this? And they're like, I didn't say that. No, I never said that.
Yeah.
Several witnesses that happens with. So it really puts them in a really bad position.
Yeah.
And one of the things I'm hoping is I'm actually thinking I'm also going to file a FOIA request with the Niles City Police Department because I believe it was a Niles City officer that was in the room with McGinnis during that interview. And I'm wondering if it would be great if by chance they also kept their file and if they kept any handwritten notes from
Oh,
if there's
sure.
no recording. It would be interesting to see what those handwritten notes because again the paradigm or the paradox between the same people that think, oh, Jody probably did say they got off at 10 are the same people saying Jody faked the timesheet and wrote 12:05.
Yeah. Those 2 things don't work.
Yeah, like you go through all that trouble to plan out, I know I need more time, so I'm going to write on
Right.
this timesheet that I didn't get off work at 12:05 and then 18 hours later I do an interview and say I got off at 10.
Right.
Like, there's like, those don't compute.
Yeah, no,
They don't add up. And that's
that
why I say
doesn't
I'm fully convinced that McGinnis is just straight up lying about that.
yeah, that doesn't make sense. I mean, I can totally accept believing one or the other, but I don't if you think that Jody is guilty, like, I can see believing one or the other, but I don't understand how you can believe both, but I'm sure there's a way. Um, quick question about the task force, and I apologize if you explained this in the episode and I'm just blanking. Why was there a homicide task force that included other law enforcement agencies? Is it because the crime was so rampant? Was it because of activity that was being like, maybe we need somebody watching what's happening? Like, do you know anything about that?
I don't know why I mean, the only place where there were consistently murders in this whole county was Benton Harbor, so I assume that has partly something to do with it. I don't know, but it was a countywide homicide task force, so I don't know if it was specifically because of crime in Benton Harbor, or if it was specifically because they felt there needed to be some oversight in Benton Harbor. I mean, there have been plenty of situations where the state and other people have come in and said there needs to be oversight in Benton Harbor. As a matter of fact, I can't get into the details because the person was off the record, but I had somebody who works for a state agency write in this week and tell me some interesting things about how the
Uh-oh. Somebody's parsing his words very carefully.
about how certain people in that municipality felt about any kind of federal or state oversight of their police department.
Well, sure. I mean, but, you could see someone not wanting that whether they were an honest cop or a dishonest cop, I guess.
Yeah,
If you think that, other
it was something.
municipalities should stay out of your business.
Yeah, it was something to do. There was. I mean, I have the specifics, but there was a. I just need to verify them independently so that this person isn't connected to him. But essentially, there was a federal program that was supposed to come in and to do something innocuous, not to investigate Benton Harbor City Police Department, but they
Mhm.
were coming into many communities to help institute this program,
Hmm.
and they were pushed out of Benton Harbor because they didn't want federal law enforcement anywhere near them, even though it was
Right.
just, it was like a community outreach thing is what they were doing.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay, let's move on to Teresa S., who says, I have a question. Is there any significance to the difference between Jody's report that during the robbery they accidentally shot into the roof inside the car versus the police report that Mario was shot in the hand during the attempted robbery? I might not have hit all the details 100%, but that's the general idea.
So there's a little confusion about it, but there's not a conflict there. I don't think Mario was actually shot in the hand. I believe, based on all the different accounts of it, um, that he was either like just grazed by the bullet on it that like grazed his hand, or that the mechanism of the gun like pinched his hand. Like he had just like he basically had a scratch on his hand. So I don't know if it was like the hammer of the gun or something like pinched and cut his hand, or the bullet grazed his hand or something like that. But in both cases, it was like gun goes off during a struggle and somehow Mario's hand got cut.
And for those of us who this is so not important, but for those of us who don't have a lot of experiences just with guns in day-to-day life in different situations when you're not on a firing range wearing, like, headphones and stuff, like, just how loud is a gun going off, even if you have one door open? Like, what how much sound would that have made? Like, would you be kind of temporarily deafened? Like, what is
Not from that gun. So
okay.
that was a 22
Oh, the 22 is
revolver.
pretty quiet, yeah.
Yeah, a 22 is a itty bitty tiny little round,
Yeah,
so it
gotcha,
doesn't sound much louder than a cap gun.
gotcha.
Inside the car, it would be louder, but it's not like now if you fired the 45 like Mario was shot with inside
Right,
there, your ears would be ringing for hours after
yeah,
that.
yeah,
But with the 22, no.
got it. Okay, Jill says, "Are we?" Well, Jill, I'm going to put your qualifier in here, even though I don't think you need it. Jill says this may be a dumb question, but are we supposed to infer something about them having to go wake up the lead detective? Is this common? I would have thought whoever was on shift would get the case, or is it an indication he was messing up, at least by not answering the phone? I get that going to wake him up affects the timeline, and I assume that's why we're mentioning it so often, but it gives the impression that he started out messing up on the case by not answering his phone. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to get that impression or not.
No, I don't think so. I mean, that stuff happens. So it's similar to so I was an arson investigator. I had my shift that I worked but if I was off duty at home, then and they needed an arson investigation, they might call me to come in to help with the investigation. And there have been times, not with me, but like other investigators that, they just you're sleeping. It just
Sure.
happens. Sometimes you just don't hear the phone ringing,
Yeah.
don't hear the radio, whatever. So no, there's nothing to infer there. It's just what happened
Gotcha.
is they called him and he didn't answer, and then he didn't live far away from there, so they ended up just walking over to his house and getting him. Also, I want to point out Josh in the chat, who is a professional shooter, pointed out that as far as the loudness of the gun that you were asking, Janet,
Mhm.
he's put the shorter the barrel, the louder the report. So because it's a pistol as opposed to a rifle, it's going to be louder because the barrel is shorter, but it's
Gotcha.
still not super booming, ear ringing loud.
Gotcha. Thanks, Josh. And thanks, Jill. Listen, you don't know how many other people listened to the episode and wondered if they were supposed to infer the same thing. So I'm glad you asked it.
Yeah, and
Solomon said, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and Tool Girl also in the chat pointed out too. Remember, it's a small department, so like in New York City, there are cops that are on duty on the night shift. There's
Right.
cops that work 24 hours a day. In a place like Benton Harbor, usually like one of the advantages of getting promoted to lieutenant to detective is you work 8 to 5 or whatever, and then you go
Mhm.
home. The downside is you're always on call and you have to come back in. So there were no detectives, I don't think, that were on duty at night. It's just patrol officers.
Gotcha. And how many detectives ended up at the scene altogether? Just two?
Just two. Yeah.
Okay. Solomon says, I feel that it's a numbers game for the police forces. Every time someone is killed, that's at least two off the street. The victim and the real or fabricated killer. Doesn't matter to them who's who. Over time, it gets out of control and cops lose themselves and their purpose, serve and protect, in all the chaos.
Yeah, I think that's a good observation, and I pitch this book all the time, but that book Ghetto Side
Yeah.
gets into that a lot about how how officers that are working in these inner cities over time get to a point where they kind of lose they don't view their humanity changes.
Yeah.
And yeah, they're looking at like all of these people, they look at the entire community as all of these people are a problem for me. So
Hmm.
if somebody gets killed, that's one less on the street, and then if we put somebody in prison for it, that's one less on the street as well.
Right.
And I think you get to a point where it just seems like in this one, again, I keep coming back to it, but going to the restaurant that morning and finding out that there's no way Jody could have done this, and then still pursuing him, and then never documenting any of that, it tells me like they don't. I don't know. Like I said, Jody thinks that this was intentional as far as them being kind of being framed for this. Um, I think that might have played into it. I think that McGinnis might have had some kind of issue with Jody, and so was happy to put Jody in prison. But also, I really think the more and more I read the question earlier about when did Jody's name come up? It came up with Andre Williams like a meet that night.
Yeah.
I think probably it's more to do with, oh, we got another murder to solve, and then a bunch of these people at the scene who happen to be Andre and all the Mileses that are there saying, well, that guy did it.
Right.
Then they're like, okay, that guy did it, and they just make their mind up. And again, like I've said many times in the season, there was no checks and balances at that time. Nobody gave a shit. They arrest somebody who is doesn't have the financial or family or anybody means to help them or to shine a light on their case, and they just go through the courts. They go to prison and they're forgotten about.
Yeah. Uh, Tony says, even though Jody is innocent, do you think it's possible they lied to investigators about things like handling firearms because they were scared and didn't want to look guilty?
Oh, absolutely. And we've talked about that before. Even when we were talking about the robbery before, it's not. I know there are still some people that can't get past that, and that's their own viewpoint on it. Um, we know kind of the circumstances that all the folks in that town were kind of living in, and the kind of way of life there is not a way of life that I'm familiar with or comfortable with. But the bottom line is, if as far getting mad at Jody because Jody held a gun to somebody is, I think, reasonable. Getting mad at Jody because Jody lied about that, I don't like. Obviously, surely no one expects that they would go in and be like, "Yep, I did the robbery. I did the robbery, but I didn't do the murder."
Right.
They're not gonna. No one's gonna do that. Not a human being in the world is going. I mean, like people don't just generally just confess to that. Most people are going to try to lie and get out of something.
Especially if you feel like there's no rules. And like if the people that are supposed to be playing by the rules are not playing by the rules, then the idea that you would be like, I'm going to rise above all of this. No matter
Yeah,
what happens to me, I'll be the only one telling the truth in this scenario.
yeah.
I'm just laughing because that seems like I'm laughing because it's such a depressing thought to be even in that position. But I
But
don't know who would do
the
that.
point is well received, and that is why I think if people are really listening and really paying attention, like there's a reason the first episode of the season was what it was. Like if you're really letting yourself understand that the way of life for the community of the people that live in Benton Harbor is different probably than the life that you're living. There's background in how they got there. And then also the episode about all the corruption with, I was sick that one, so it was really, shorter than I would have liked it to have been. But to understand that, like you said, like everybody's lying, like they're reading in the newspaper, a couple times a week about how these cops are lying and beating their wives and getting DUIs and doing all this stuff and getting away with it. That does, whether you think that it wouldn't for you, I can promise you it does make a difference for the people that live there. Where they're like, why am I going to come in and just be, like you said, like rise above all this and be the honest one? They see the cops that, one of the first people that I talked to when we got out and started talking to people on the streets of Benton Harbor, as soon as I told them what we were doing, their exact quote to me was "fuck the police,"
Yeah.
which I know is, that's a reference to a song, but like that's the mentality, is like they said they're all crooked. They
Yeah.
all harass us. And that's what I heard over and over and over again. That's how they all viewed the police. They're not there. You've heard Angelique very eloquently explain that. Like they are not there to serve and protect the way the community feels about them.
Right.
Even the people that aren't mixed up in all the violence that's happening. They're not there to serve and protect us. They're there for the way they see it, their own purposes.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Brandon says, does Andrew Collins have any knowledge about this case?
I don't think so. I mean, Brandon Collins became a cop in Benton Harbor in 2003, so it was after this.
Andrew. Sorry, you just said
A-
Brandon.
oh yeah,
Yeah,
Andrew
but
Collins.
you know what? That's an apt segue, because here you are with a perfect example of someone who was on the inside of that, who was like, did not was careful, if memory serves, to not throw a bunch of, fellow law enforcement at the time under the bus, but certainly was like, yeah, I mean, this is a culture I was taught. This is a culture I came up in, and this is the way that it spun out of control for me. So his version of that, about making money, or, making money for the department, or, making himself look better for the same kinds of glory that, other people do other bad things, ties into what Solomon was saying too. It's not just about homicide. It can be about robbery or drugs or reselling drugs, or look at all those things, like you said, that came out, that are just out there about all kinds of police officers, not just the ones that we're talking about in this one, in Benton Harbor.
Yeah, and also like keep in mind that's like Andrew Collins' story is relevant too, because when he's describing that culture that the Benton Harbor Police Department that he was working in, yes, he got in the department after Jody was convicted, but it was right after Jody was convicted.
Yeah.
All these same officers were still
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
He worked all these names that we've heard throughout this season are the same people that Andrew Collins was working with during all of that. Like,
Right.
and we just, we were chatting offline before we got on how just in this last week, both Zach and I talked to law enforcement officers who gave us like, we're not giving any details about either one, but painted a pretty grim picture of particular people, particular names in this case, and the culture in Benton Harbor and those cops. One of the ones I spoke to was working as a Benton Harbor cop at the time. Doesn't remember this particular case. He was just a patrolman, but when I started talking to him about the case, he's like, yeah, yeah, probably.
Sounds right. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Uh, Final thing is from Nancy. This may be a comment more than a question, but I wanted people to know that one of the ways things get as bad as they do in Benton Harbor is that it's very difficult to campaign for office as someone who is actively opposed by the police. It makes it much harder to have events where you need a permit. Your yard signs may disappear. Your staff might get harassed. There's a documentary about Cory Booker's run for mayor of Newark. The police supported the incumbent and made his race a lot harder. In theory, a democracy, people could use the political process to rein in police misconduct, but it's hard to get politicians to actually do it. That's another little piece of the puzzle that we're talking
Yeah.
about here, right? Is it's hard to take over and be in a position of power if the people currently in power are very much against you exposing anything that they're doing. Like, wow,
Yeah.
that's would be so hard.
Well, and I've talked to people in the community who about running for office. I've had a lot of those conversations where it's like, what do we do? Like, I can't fix this from here. Like, you all have to fix it from within the community, and we're here to help. But like, you need people to step up and run for mayor and run for office and get in there. And I think there's some people that are probably going to do that the next go round. But at the same time, the other thing I hear is a lot of them are scared. They're like
Sure.
they've told me like you don't understand the way they see it. You don't understand how corrupt this police department is. Like
Mm.
this is like shit from the movies. Like if they're going to run for mayor with a on a platform of I'm going to, get rid of the police chief, they feel like they will be arrested, they will be harassed, they will, violence will come on them. Like from the stories that they tell, and again, I have no way of verifying what's true and what's not, but from the stories they tell that some of the officers are connected with some of the people that are committing the violence and the drug dealing and the things that are happening, that they're kind of part of that, and they're like it's a scary thing to stand up and say I'm going to make a change here, and then you got to fight. If they're right and the police department is corrupt as they feel it is, it's a terrifying situation.
Well, it also makes sense that if this is the culture and that this is the culture you've created, that someone from that environment, the person who would be potentially attracted to joining that police force would be a person who has some understand that would stick it out, would be someone who had some understanding of what the benefit would be to being a part of the police force, having connections to the crime in the community. Like, I don't think that if that's known in your neighborhood about the police, who is that attracting to come and reform themselves? Like, what young kid is going to be like, you know what? I'd like to join the police force. I bet I could make a change in this neighborhood. Like, if it were me, I would be a person who's like, what do I stand to gain from joining the police force the way it is now? Because I ain't going to be able to change it. Well, maybe I could get on the inside of some deals or whatever. Like, the whole thing is so cynical,
Yeah,
but it's cynical for a reason. It's
it's a sad
cynical
outlook.
economically, it's cynical emotionally, it's cynical, politically. It's just broken. And so changing it is very hard.
Yeah, and I think what you see a lot of is a couple different versions of a story. One is Andrew Collins' version, where you go in with the best intentions. Because again, the other side of that is, it's hard to get a job as a cop. Probably getting easier and easier now, but it's always been, historically, there's a lot of, there's 100 people applying for every job that comes up, and so they'll take what they can get. And because most people don't want to go work in Benton Harbor, they end up in Benton Harbor. And so I think Andrew Collins' version of the story is one where you go in with the best intentions and you get sucked into the machine, or it becomes a stepping stone where you go there, you're like, fuck this, and you keep applying until you got a little bit of experience and you get the hell out of there. That happens a lot
Mm,
too. I know a ton of officers in this county that I've worked with over the years that got their start in Benton Harbor, did 6 months, a year, and as soon as they could get out of there, they got out of there.
mm,
And some of those are the same officers that are coming forward, and talking to me now and telling me, yeah, some of that, like, that shit was going on, like the shit, changing the times and framing people and pressuring witnesses and threatening them, and get like I've had officers that were working for Benton Harbor at this time that said that, yeah, that's what they did. Of course, that's what they did. That's what was
yeah.
going on all the time. Like this, like the things I'm saying to you, for the people that are acting like this is crazy conspiracy theory, I'm telling you it's not. I can't. I'm not telling you 100% that's what happened. But when I'm picking through the evidence, and that's the picture that I'm getting, and then cops that worked for that city, for that department at that time are telling me, I'm certain that's what happened when they worked on the inside. Like, I'm not out of line. These are not conspiracy theories. This is what was happening at that time. And with that being said, you said that was the last question.
Mhm.
So we'll go ahead and wrap this things up. Look at us, just me and you, no Zach, and we still got 50 minutes out of this thing.
That's right. Well, we
Uh,
still had Zach because we talked a lot about his feedback too, so
yeah.
thanks, Zach.
Um, so this week you got to hear all about McGinnis's version of events as far as the investigation. Some of that was pretty useful. We got some new information, but we also heard a lot about what McGinnis says went on with Jody in their interview. And this week we get the other side of that. We're going to get Jody Hill's testimony, where we'll hear what they had to say, their version of what happened, both at the through their interview, and also a big one was Jody is taking swings like crazy. When you read this testimony, and I read a lot of it to you in the episode, you could tell that Jody is their defense attorney wasn't doing shit, they got on the stand and they are just, I've never read a transcript like this before, where they're just throwing evidence out, they're pointing things, and it's crazy that it's being allowed. Like Jody's narrating from the stand, Jody's asking the prosecutor questions.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really something. So that's coming up this Sunday. Tune into that. Make sure you give it a listen, and we'll talk to you guys next week.
Sounds great. Thanks, everybody. Bye,
Bye,
guys.
Alrighty. Look at that.
I think there will be a oh yeah, just because of the Berkshires thing. We're still doing our normal stuff on Tuesday, right? You guys aren't.
Yeah,
leaving
we're not
on
leaving till
Tuesday.
Thursday.
Okay.
Gosh, that's next week. I'm supposed to write a speech.
No.
Whoops. Which
Just
I knew
have
that.
Erica write it for you.
That's why we got so far ahead with the. I'm like inching her into, like, when we tried her, like, starting to write the script, she was really struggling with it. Like trying to get it into my voice and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so we're like, well, should we do the outline? Like, if you can outline it, if you can break things down, I can put it into my words, and then I can go through and do more research. And she's like, started putting screenshots in of the stuff from the whatever the episode, from the case documents. And like, now I was like, what would help me is, if at the beginning of each act of the if you like put like, in the first act, we're going to be talking about this. And I'm noticing now, like, when she's writing that stuff, like, it sounds like me. I think we're this close to being like, why don't you just write it just a little more, like just add a little bit more of that, and then
Put a little more stink on it.
pretty soon she'll be writing the script. Speaking of which, Mike did send me the promo code for that tushy. I think I'm going to order one. Pretty proud of that. Pretty proud
Danielle,
of
I did see that you said you had an appointment with Zara, and I was like, oh, someone wants us to know that they're doing a little shopping next week.
that.
But
I
it's
don't know what Zara is.
Zara's a clothing place, but really,
Oh.
she meant it auto-corrected to Zara from Zach.
Yeah, I got that, but
yeah.
I didn't know what Zara
Yeah,
was.
no, it's like a fast fashion thing. Great questions, everybody. Thanks for pitching in on the fly, everybody in the chat with
and
your
all of you that are here,
presentations.
like right now, even the show's over, there's still 54 of you in here live. You're all clearly engaged. Write in questions. Write in questions in the Facebook post.
Or even if, or let me add to this. I like when people put comments, because the comments still lead to other conversations. Sometimes the comments will come up, will make a question come up in my mind or Zach's mind or in the chat's mind.
Oh,
so
yeah.
even if you think, well, I don't have a question per se, but I have an observation, that's also welcome, because that helps us, continue the conversation, and stuff comes out of that. So do that.
Although we have learned that we're pretty good at blabbing, because there have been times where we're like, man, that's not very many questions. What are we going to do?
Yeah.
And then we talk for an hour.
And they were like, well, we're out of time. We didn't get to the questions this week. Sorry, everybody.
Oh, thanks, Grayson.
Thanks,
little super chat from Grayson. Great show, guys. You guys are always awesome. And Grayson, you also are always awesome. All right, we're going to sign off of this thing. We'll talk to you guys next week. We love you guys. Thank you so much for joining us.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.